Hello, everybody. This is great. Just let a few more people in. Welcome to a very exciting new Goldster venture. This is our very first session of PPG, Purpose, Passion, Grit. And the person who is starting it off today, I'm very excited about this, is somebody who has purpose, passion, and grit in every fibre of her body. She is the amazing explorer, Rosie Stancer. And I have to say, Rosie, I love this. I don't know who the journalist was, but they described you as a cross between Tinkerbell and the Terminator. What that was. And welcome to Goldster. Tell us about what it's like to be a cross between Tinkerbell and the Terminator.
Well, thank you for that, Lucinda, truffling out that little nugget. And hello, everyone. Really excited to meet you. And hopefully I'm looking more Tinkerbell than Terminator for you today. But I think that I love that title that was forced upon me, because to me it says everything about what I do, exploration, not just being about physical strength, which it does take a fair amount.
I'm sure.
But more so the mental strength.
And how do you prepare yourself if you're setting off for an expedition, your very first expedition? How did you mentally prepare yourself?
Well, you find that the mental strength actually comes with the physical training, because it endows you with a great sense of confidence and belief in your own abilities as you continue to surprise yourself. So too with the research into a project. You might suddenly ignite about the idea of going to the North Pole or South Pole. And one little voice in your head says, go, this is fantastic. You know you can do it. And the other little voice is saying, what, you? A little bit of fluff? Come on, you're a woman, you're small, you're a housewife, you know. What makes you think you can do it? But the more you start researching into the journey ahead, you're already on your way. You're already taking the first few steps of your journey, and therefore your end goal hoves ever so slowly into sight, and you suddenly realize, yes, I can do this. And the more other people say not very likely, the more I find that fuels my determination. I suppose I'm just obstinate.
That's fantastic, though, because I cannot even imagine going through what you've gone through, and you've just described it as if it's open to anybody, which I doubt in my case particularly. But I think it's amazing because you kind of fell into this, didn't you? You didn't begin your life thinking, I'm going to be a polar explorer and I'm going to do all these things. Tell us about how that moment came when you first thought, maybe this is for me.
Yeah, well, I suppose that moment illustrates why I do believe that anyone could do it if they set their mind to it, or at least anyone can achieve what they really want if they set their mind to it because they believe passionately in doing it. You've got to have that passion. It's got to be ignited. And the moment I had when my red button was pushed was just hearing about a selection process that was going to take place on Dartmoor the following day, for 4 days, with about several hundred other nutty women to put together the first ever all-women's team to the North Pole. And, I wish I had a snazzier PR soundbite of an answer, but all I can say very unscientifically that it was like throwing a lit match on petrol. Whoosh! I just instantly knew I wanted to do this, and completely unfounded, I totally believed that I could and that I would, and that it was only just the beginning. I've never been more confident of anything other than my marriage.
Am I right that you had a kind of Archimedes moment in the bath when you thought?
Yes, it is. You remembered. It was in the bath. I shot out of the bath like a Harriet jet. I'm going to get some kit. I mean, I'd never been camping before. I hated all that muddy.
You've never been camping before? Fantastic.
Avoid at all costs.
I do know that you went to school in the Highlands, didn't you? Do you think this prepared you for hardship and cold?
Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, this is well, I am 61, and at the time it wasn't so unusual before people start calling social welfare that I was packed off age 7 as a little girl, hundreds of miles from home, to board in this school in the Highlands called Butterston near Dunkeld. Only 30 of us. I loved it. It was just a huge adventure. And it was away from any, strict matriarchs of home.
And did it involve kind of swimming in freezing cold sea in all summer and winter, or not?
No, we weren't anywhere near any sea other than a loch, but it did involve some pretty unpleasant introductions to skiing at Glen Shee. Very cold, damp place. I don't know if anyone out there knows it. Skating, riding in all weather, very outdoorsy.
So this really, I mean, joking apart, this probably did really give you a really good background for being able to cope with all that when you were actually there in polar conditions.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, because one didn't question it because you were in the same boat as everyone else who was there. So, yes, I can remember being horribly cold. I can also remember being horribly hungry. I can remember eating my toothpaste. But one didn't question it at the time. So, yes, I think...
Enid Blyton stories of everybody living off tuck boxes is absolutely not true.
No, they're absolutely not true. In fact, we weren't allowed sweets. But we were allowed bird food to feed the birds in our little huts that we used to build in the surrounding countryside. So, of course, we all used to ask for swoop, which had peanuts in it, so that we could eat them.
It's fantastic, those things that you remember from childhood, those really vivid memories of brand names and things. So
it's ironic, isn't it, that now, in later years, I can remember on the North Pole, or was it the South Pole, being so hungry with low rations in my tent. I remember scrummaging around for some pine kernels on the tent floor.
Wow, yeah. That took you back.
Yeah.
Did you survive with things? I mean, when you're packing for an expedition, you're going solo. How do you sort out your rations?
With absolute ultimate care. In fact, quite scientifically. I was very lucky because I had a sponsor called Mars, who you've all heard of, and they allowed me to go to their factory in Slough to use their production line to pack the rations.
Wow.
They could weigh them down to a fraction of a gram, which was terribly important. All the divisions between the protein, the carbs, the fat, etc. And obviously you can't take any wrappers onto the ice, south or north. So, all specially stripped, chopped, bagged, sealed, and doing some modifications like adding oil into the porridge flakes and sealing that so that you were cramming in as many calories as possible into as lighter weight as possible.
Right. Wow. And did you work with a specific nutritionist? I mean, how did you get to have all this knowledge?
Despite the generous sponsorship, I couldn't really afford a nutritionist. So I relied on, there was a nutritionist within Mars, which was very useful. And otherwise, I just relied on learning from other people. All these things, I was sitting on the shoulders of giants. So, I wasn't going to take what Shackleton and Scott took, which included various drugs like cocaine and heroin, marching rations. But I did talk to the Norwegians and to some contemporary predecessors of mine about the wisdom behind the nutrition. It's vital, of course.
And are the Royal Geographical Society helpful with things like this? Can they kind of network you with other people?
Yes, they do. They're very helpful. So if there's anyone out there who needs to be pointed in the right direction, RGS, if you know who to approach, and I always deal with, she'll kill me for saying this, she'll get inundated now, but Shane Windsor is terribly helpful. And all the people within the world of exploration, whether it's hot desert, whether it's ice desert, whatever, that everybody is very good about helping other people because we all began somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's part of our legacy to share our learning.
Now, I understand that you actually were a debutante, weren't you?
Yes, not a very good one.
And I'm longing to know how you just went from being a deb to being a polar explorer. I mean, tell us about your career. So you went to kind of primary school in Scotland.
Yes.
And then what happened after that?
Then I went down, along with some of the other girls as well, actually, to a lovely, very comfortable school called Heathfield near Ascot, which was a public school. Then by the time I got to the sixth form, my father had fallen on rather hard times. He wasn't mentally wholly well because he'd been a prisoner of war under the Japanese, and it was beginning to show some of the long-term effects, and he hadn't been working. So money was scarce. So my mother asked me if I'd like to go to the local sixth form college where we lived in Henley-on-Thames. I don't believe I ever gave an answer, but I found myself there in a very roughy-tufty school, which was mixed as well, terrors, boys. And at the same time as doing my A-levels there, my mother, in her wisdom, thought it would be a good idea to launch me into the debutante scene. So I was cramming for A-levels, then leaping onto trains into London with the one and only dress I had.
And did you enjoy it? I mean, was it fun or was it terrifying, or was it just something you took in your stride because you just had to do it and study for your A-levels as well?
I don't think I didn't enjoy it. It all seemed a different world to me. And I was a country bumpkin. So were some of the other girls, but I certainly didn't understand what the London girls were talking about. And they all seemed so sophisticated compared to me. I found it quite difficult. And I think by then it was really more in the interests of the mothers who were bringing back their social lives, which had come to a grinding halt in bringing up children like me. So,
like the kind of the Deb equivalent of stage mothers pushing their daughters forward and then just enjoying the limelight themselves.
Yes. Well, the time was over when you expected your daughter to get married as a result of doing the circuit. Certainly, I didn't have any proposals.
So, but then you went into you didn't go into anything vaguely akin to exploring, did you? Was it PR that you were working in?
The lovely fluffy world of PR, and I really enjoyed that because you're dealing with people all the time in a very relaxed way. I think I'd have shriveled up and died if I'd gone to the city. And it was from PR that I was working in PR when I heard that piece on the radio, and
it started you on the bid for exploration. So how fit were you? I mean, because you said earlier, it's not all about physical fitness, but you must have been incredibly fit. So before you started training, were you already somebody who was very interested in keeping yourself fit, or did you have to kind of change your whole life?
I was right there in the pioneering days of Jane Fonda workouts. I rather think I had a stripy leotard too and leg warmers. But one did end up thinking, well, what am I going to do with this? It's all great fun. But and then when it came to the expedition training, of course, it gets more earnest and specialised, and you're training for your life. So I've always, for expeditions, polar expeditions, had a coach, a proper trainer, who has brought me up to the top levels. So you're training extremely hard, sufficiently so that I used to be very frightened the night before of what the training was going to have in store for me the next day.
I'm not surprised. Well, we've got a comment in the chat. Polly says, you look like Jane Fonda, and I can tell you she's not talking to me.
No Oscar.
No Oscar. Well, do you know what? I think you've done even more amazing things than she's done. So tell us about your very first expedition. So you were part of an all-female team, and tell us about how that came about.
Fantastic example of teammanship, because we had all been through a year of selection process, which culminated in one with the SAS grade 4, one of their top grades. So it was jolly tough. And the 20 of us who got through all became, by and large, great friends. We were, from completely different walks of life. It was like Pied Piper Hamelin. There was a mother and daughter, there was a mother of triplets, there was a young farmer, there was this, that. All women, different shapes, sizes, colours and creeds. And none of us could afford the time, because we were all working, for several months to be invested in undertaking this expedition. And also it was very difficult getting the sponsorship, because you're talking an awful lot of money.
How much money? I mean, to set up an expedition like that, roughly?
I think that was somewhere between about $250,000.
Yeah. So,
however,
like Mars and Snickers.
Well, they weren't on board at that time.
Yeah.
But we did get full sponsorship, because the whole challenge attracted so much publicity and attention. So we did land on our feet in that respect. And we made ourselves up into teams of 4, and each team had a relay section to the North Pole. Then, at the end of that, there was a small handful of us who thought that's not enough. We've learned quite a lot about the ice. We want to do some more.
So it didn't put you off?
Didn't put me off. And I have to add at this point that those of us who wanted to learn when we were in the ice, learned from 2 amazing female guides we had, one was Canadian, one American, Mattie McNair and Denise, and they taught us a lot, enough to afford me the ambition to go on my own without a guide.
This to me is absolutely extraordinary. How do you even begin to do an unguided trip, polar trip?
You had to do a lot of research, and again look to the people who you respect as having learnt on the ice themselves. So before I did my solos, I would fly over to Norway and speak to the great Norwegian explorers, because they're really very good at all this stuff. And I'd also speak to anyone else in this country, the likes of Penn Haddow. Even Rand Fines was very supportive, people like that. All sorts of levels, right down to the nitty-gritty detail, because the devil is in the detail on the ice.
Of course. I mean, when you're unguided, but you are not unsupported. I mean, presumably you have a team who are watching out for you in case anything goes wrong. And
absolutely. Solo.
The people are there as your backup.
Well, when I was solo, inverted commas, if you can bear me doing that, it's a complete lie. One wasn't solo at all. I had a wonderful base camp manager on every expedition back in the UK, with whom I'd have communications on a satellite phone every 24 hours, or whatever the safety system was that we worked at, so that they would have a traffic light system if they didn't hear from me, as to a time period of when to, call out the cavalry.
Yeah.
And all the way down the line, I had a lovely lady called Shah Harrison who used to help me a lot in terms of all the logistics and the preparations. I had my trainer, Alan Pearson, and Lee Watts, and I also had the world's leading polar photographer, Martin Hartley. And I learned a lot from him. And most of the photographs that you'll be seeing on your screen were taken from him for the good ones anyway, for our library.
Ben, actually, if Ben wouldn't mind sharing the screen. Thank you so much. So talk us through this one, Rosie.
This one I call Setting Off. It was one of the last shots that Martin took of me setting off to the North Pole. And you can see the light. It's a very sort of intimidating twilight, because the sun is still so very low. And you'll also see that I've got 2 sledges because it makes it easier for getting over all the lumpy bits of ice. Because this stage looks flat, but later on the Arctic ice, you get massive walls of jagged ice up to 50 feet high. So I had to be able to relay my sledges.
That's incredible. And to me, this just looks like the kind of landscape that isn't really real. But of course, you were living in it for how long?
On that one, 84 days.
Wow.
But, when you set off, I think what is interesting also about that shot is possibly if there was a thought bubble. What was I thinking? And it was a very potent mix of the thrill, being transported by the thrill of the unknown ahead, but with an awful lot of trepidation of the same unknown as well, because the only thing that you can be confident of is that things won't go according to plan.
I think that's a very good maxim for life. It's a very good maxim for life in a pandemic anyway, so perhaps we should all learn for that. So Angie has made a comment in the chat. And by the way, everybody who's listening, you are muted, but you can write into the chat if you've got any comments or questions that you want me to put to Rosie. Angie has said, such a tiny and vulnerable figure in a huge landscape. It's amazing. It's like one of those kind of romantic paintings, those huge paintings of an avalanche with tiny figures in. Quite incredible.
It's a good comment, that, because sometimes people have said, you're so tiny, and when you, at one point, finding yourself alone, totally alone on 5 million square miles of ice, don't you feel insignificant? And the honest truth is, no, it's really strange. It's part of the spirituality of this thing, because it's physical, psychological, and very spiritual, these expeditions. You feel very significant in all this massive desolation. And I think it's because you feel a sense of undeniable proximity to a greater and a good force and energy.
And you are walking knowing that probably there's no other person who's stepped exactly where you were stepping, even though there have been other polar explorers. They likely haven't trodden on that particular piece of the earth. I mean, is that just the most extraordinary feeling, like you're almost kind of like God, or you're conquering something?
No, I'm very, very touchy about this thing of conquering, because having experienced the might as well as the beauty of these places, you can't go around, stabbing flags in and conquering them.
Good, I'm really glad to hear you say. Iris has got a couple of questions. She says, what time of year was this photo taken?
It was taken very early in March, when the sun first peaks its nose up over the horizon in the Arctic.
And are you waiting desperately for that day? Do you have a specific date, or do you have to wait for the weather conditions and set off just when you can?
Both, because you have to be flown in a tiny little twin otter plane to your starting point. Because your end aim, the North Pole, is the sea, effectively, you have to start at the last point of land to make it a true endurance expedition. So you get flown to this tiny little island called Ward Hunt Island, but the pilots cannot fly until there is just a tiny little slither of a window of light, which happens to normally be the 5th of March. And then on that date, you'll get your scramble call, but only if the conditions for takeoff and for landing are safe enough.
And so did you go on the 5th of March, or did you have a couple of days where you were waiting anxiously?
I think I went on the 5th of March. I got the scramble call, whereas down on Antarctica, waiting in Punta Arenas, the longest wait I had there to fly onto Antarctica onto an ice strip was, you'll never complain at Gatwick again, 3 weeks.
Oh, my goodness.
What can you do as the Inuit? Say, hurry up and wait.
Yeah. So, and Angie has asked, how did you prepare yourself mentally for the loneliness? Or maybe she says I should rephrase that, the aloneness. She's like, I like your rephrasing there, Angie. How did you manage to prepare yourself for that? Can you ever prepare yourself for that?
You do a lot of training on your own as well as with your coach because you have to build up your endurance. And I think that helps. You're spending several hours every day out pulling your tires or whatever it is that you're doing for training. And I think that in part prepares you. Then I think, to be honest, when I first set off solo and I thought, oh, really, what am I doing? Am I capable of this? And thank goodness no one else is around to see me make an absolute mess of it. Because really, and like this picture, when you set off, well, your greatest fear is not of the physicality or the challenges, or dare I say it, I don't think I was even frightened or dwelt much on it possibly being a one-way ticket, not coming back. But what I was morbidly frightened of was making a fool of myself.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
There's a question here. How does it feel when you say goodbye to your family? You're married, not knowing if you'll be back okay?
Well, you have to believe that you're coming back okay. And saying goodbye, particularly to my son, was heartrending, but you can't show it.
And who was your son at the point?
He was, when I went to the North Pole, he was about 10, and I gave him projects so that he felt involved in the expedition, which helped us both, actually. So he was school project manager, and he had to log things from the blog onto the national curriculum they were following. So he was fine. He was happy. He had a responsibility, and he actually had, thank God, the angels sent an au pair who he adored and became very much part of our family. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible. Because at that stage, those boys need a loving female figure in their lives.
Yeah.
And tellingly, I had said to him, I'll be away for 75 days at the outside. Now, when the clock ticked past 75 days, things instantly became much harder for me. It was almost as if the sledge was double the weight because my heart was so heavy. I thought that I was betraying him.
That's so heartbreaking. And when you got back, I mean, how was he about that? Did he understand that it had taken more time? Was he cross with you? I mean, was he just very excited to see you?
He was very excited to see me. And I was rather nervous. I felt shy because I hadn't really talked to anyone for 3 months and couldn't remember how to do it, let alone with my own son. So a wise friend just said to me, I rang her and said, how am I going to deal with this with Jock, my son? And she said, you don't have to talk, just be with him. So, I was just back with him and we stuck together very happily.
Does he have any desire to be a polar explorer?
I'm not sure. I doubt it'll be polar, actually, but he's now getting very much into his sports. So who's to say?
Excellent. So was there another photo that you wanted us to look at here, Rosie?
Yes, I think this one here that you just clicked onto is relevant to us all because I call it the 50-50 picture because 50% strength, 50% in your mind, if not more in your mind. I wouldn't be able to move that heavy sledge if I didn't have the end game in mind, that I was doing it for this purpose that I believed in with such passion. And this gives you great strength.
Sorry, we've already got a comment saying that shot is amazing. It really is an incredible picture. So where precisely is this?
That was actually high on the Arctic, but it was taken by wonderful Martin Hartley. And so it was taken before I set off. And every expedition, it's a good idea to do this because you're going to be on your own on the expedition. So you can't take this sort of a shot. So we just build up a little cheat, as it were, library when we're acclimatizing and training on the ice, because you can't just land, in the Inuit village and take off onto the ice, because you'd get a terrible Arctic shock, as they call it. You have to acclimatize to the temperatures. That was about minus 40 centigrade.
Wow.
So you go in for an hour and then you come back and then you go. It's a bit like acclimatizing to altitude.
Yes, I was thinking it sounds a bit like altitude sickness or something, having to just go slowly. Gosh. So, and Iris has asked, what emergency gear do you pack? And I was just thinking, how do you cope with kind of medically?
Yes. Well, emergency kit, first of all, communications for safety. The pilots wouldn't fly you unless you can tick their little boxes that they have of 3 forms of communication. So you have a satellite phone, and you have your, what I call your teddy bear, which is the ultimate, which is a beacon, an emergency beacon, which you have strapped on you all the time, and it's just a button basically which you press, and that bounces straight off a satellite and calls the cavalry. Now, whether the cavalry can come or not is a different matter.
I was wondering, one just has to hope that there is a cavalry ready and waiting to come.
Yes. Then
did you have to press that beacon?
What?
Did you ever have to press that?
No.
That's amazing.
And there were times when I was in trouble, but I mean, one of them was when I was in the water, so I couldn't. So, it's sort of,
I think this is it. You thought this was your last moment?
Yes, I did. Yes. On a couple of occasions, I thought.
Which exploration was that on, where you were in the water? North Pole.
Yeah.
Well, so Polly has asked, did you find it difficult being with friends and fitting back into your normal life after such a life-changing experience that no one else could really relate to?
Yes, very hard. And it's almost a question for my husband, because I think he'd say that I probably wasn't quite myself for, say 6 months after some of the polar expeditions and other expeditions. But for the North Pole solo, I think I was not myself for a couple of years, actually.
Wow. And Iris has asked, did the vastness give you agoraphobia?
No. Never. I loved it. And funnily enough, coming back, almost circling back to the last question before that, I find now that I'm actually quite claustrophobic. I don't like being in big crowds with people too close to me, not just for reasons of COVID.
I think that makes sense when you've had that incredible sense of space and been able to survive when you're in that enormous, incredible environment to come back.
Environment. But your life in that environment is distilled down to quite simply survival. And I find that when you come back to this reality, it's very needly corrosive, stressful, that everyone expects you to multitask and do lots and lots and lots of different things at the same time, which is a complete contrast to the life that you've had on the ice.
And did you kind of come back and think, you were being offered normal sized food rations and thinking, I just can't eat that. I'm not used to eating a big meal or having this variety of food. Did you find that quite difficult?
Yes. Because one spends so much time on the ice fantasizing about food. It's wonderful. It fills the theatre of the mind. And I already had a very clear idea of what I'd have when I came back to this reality. And my husband took me out to this relatively quiet restaurant, which was very sensible of him. And I looked at the menu and I thought, my goodness, it was very stressful having to make decisions. So I ordered lots of things and they had to join another table onto my table with all these plates of food. I couldn't eat a thing. I just sat and stared at it, but it was wonderful just to look at it and smell it.
The smell of it must have been incredible. Well, so what kind of food were you fantasizing about when you were on the ice? I'm assuming hot food.
Hot food. Uh, Liver, mashed potato, and spinach, to be specific, and a lot of cake. I was obviously low on iron.
I was going to say, I wonder what that was your body craving. How fascinating. Geeta has asked a couple of questions. Were there ever times when you thought you weren't going to make it back home? You've talked about once being in the water. Were there other occasions when you really thought you weren't going to make it?
Yes. There was in particular an occasion when I was caught up in an ice quake. This is when all the plates of ice, the frozen crust that lies across the Arctic Ocean, it's moving all the time, and it's the wind shunting it, but also the sea currents below. So you get these enormous plates of ice being smashed up against each other and elsewhere being torn apart. So on this particular occasion, some very old ice that shouldn't have been moving at all, started with global climate changes, I suppose, started breaking up. And I was amongst very tall pressure ridges as well, which are made up of big boulders of ice. And suddenly there was this sort of rumbling from beneath the ice. It's always a very noisy place, but you learn to listen to the sound and to interpret it. And I didn't like the sound of this. And plates of ice started folding behind me like Melba toast is a good way of describing it. And then the boulders on the pressure ridges, the walls of ice, started moving and falling down. And all these black lines started appearing on the ice beneath my feet. Wherever I went, it didn't seem that there was anywhere safe.
That must have been absolutely terrifying. But did you not have to be terrified? Did you just have to focus and get out of that situation as well as you could?
Yes, and fear is kept back and suppressed while you have to concentrate, and it's when you've done all that you can do that it really kicks in. And my big concern at that time was obviously either being crushed by the ice boulders or being swallowed up by the opening ices, if you literally think of it like an earthquake.
Yeah.
So I had pulled my sledges close to me. I had dug out all my safety communication, the satellite phone, etc., and shoved it down the front of my flying suit. I got out my extra mitts and I got out my I got this, that, the other. And then in the end, I thought, right, what do I do now? Because this storm was still going on and the noise was, I can't describe it, biblical dimensions. I mean, O2 on megawatt. And so I had this little laminated sheet of paper, and on it, my boy Jock had written some words and illustrated them with butterflies and caterpillars and rainbows. And on the other side, my husband had written a message of love and support. So I just took this out and put it on top of my sledge and focused on it.
Wow.
I had to focus because the fear that it was rising up because there's nothing more I could do, and things happen to your mind, things happen to your body as it prepares itself to die. It was not a good moment, but it was a very moving moment when I did that, and it focused my energy totally.
And to get through that must have been the most exhilarating. I mean, just to feel that you could get through that, did that spur you on to know that you were going to make it to the end? Or were you just terrified of it happening again?
No, I think you're right. It is a feeling of triumph. And what eventually happened was the ice was all moving, and my periphery vision, I saw almost like a sort of passageway open up. And I just belted it with my two sledges through the gap in the ice and kept moving out of the disturbed area. And it's a positive feeling afterwards. It's, send a couple of prayers out that way and say, wonderful, I did it. I got through that one. Right. what next?
How incredible. So was that in the North or the South Pole that happened?
That was the North.
So we talked a bit about the North. Tell us about the South Pole. And I don't know if you want a particular photo at this moment.
Yes, I think Ben, if you've got slide number 4, I have a list here, and possibly not that one. Yes, that one. That is Antarctica for you. It's a bit of a dramatic shot. I stole it off Ran Fiennes, actually. It's a crevasse. But the reason why I'm showing this is because the crevasses happen in the tensions of the ice cap, because, of course, Antarctica, unlike the Arctic, is a continent covered with this huge, great cloche of ice, which is up to 10,000 feet deep by the time you get up to the South Pole. And Antarctica is such a very different place to the Arctic. It's massive. It's haunting. It's swept by these katabatic winds. And its main hazards are it's cold exacerbated by the winds, but also these crevasses. I tend to think of it as more of a kind of physical and psychological endurance doing an expedition across. She's Hitchcock, whereas her younger sister, the Arctic, is more Harrison Ford, all action-packed violence every moment.
Preference for either one, or are they just so different from each other that you can't even compare them in that way?
They're incomparable. I think that I do get upset that people lump the two together in terms of expeditions, because the Arctic is infinitely tougher and more dangerous than Antarctica. Antarctica has her hazards, but is more predictable in the sense of if you really prepare yourself assiduously, you should be all right, God willing. Whereas the Arctic, you're playing chess with the devil.
Wow. We have a question from Polly. How did the Inuit respond to you? Were they expecting you, and were they welcoming or wary?
Well, when back in the time of the first expedition, all the women, when we arrived at the little Inuit airport in Resolute on Cornwallis Island, which is the furthest north you can fly on that sort of a plane, all the Inuits would gather to see who was arriving with the polar madness, as they called it. And they'd seen some big burly men teams arrive, and then they saw all these fluffy girls in their rather sexy flying suits arriving, and they just burst out laughing. They thought it was hilarious. However, one of the wonderful legacies to that expedition was when we came back, an Inuit woman I'd befriended because I'd stayed with her and her husband came up to me and said, "Could you tell your team that we, the women of Resolute, would like to thank them very much because they have done so much for us and our reputation as women with them, who are now showing us more respect."
That's fantastic.
I don't think that respect lasted very long, I have to say, but it showed what you can actually do. Because, we were one of, I think, only 2 of the teams on the ice that year who actually made it.
Wow, yeah, gosh. Well, good for you. It's fantastic. Anne has made a comment. She says, really interesting, thank you, including that you feel the Arctic is more dangerous. I've been to Antarctica and written about people on Scott's Terra Nova expedition, but I'm in awe of such physical efforts and preparations for solo travel. Congratulations on all these achievements. I'm going to move on from polar exploration in just a moment, but I did want to ask you, are you inspired by stories of the past? I've just finished reading Erebus, The Story of a Ship by Michael Palin. And the kind of Victorian explorers and what they went through and the heartbreaking realities of that expedition. Do you find that you're reading through all these kind of historic expeditions and learning from that?
Yes.
I don't want to know because they're all so terrible.
So before I set off on an expedition, I don't do any reading at all because it might put one off.
Yeah.
Which sounds a bit foolish, sort of stick my head in the ice. But on the other hand, I do talk with the contemporary explorers. And also there was a tendency in certain times, although some of those men were incredible, the era of heroism and really going into the unknown. But with some big exceptions, like Apsley, Cherry Garrett, etc., some of them did tend to ham it up a bit. Some people still do in their stories.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. I love that, Rosie. So we've talked a lot about your polar exposure, and to be honest, I could talk to you about it all day, but we are starting to run out of time, and I really want to talk to you about the Aral Sea. So could you tell us about what you have been doing most recently and why it's so important for people to understand about what we're doing to the planet?
Yes, and in fact, Ben, we could actually slide to slide number 10, which is a map, 2 maps of the Aral. My compass needle swung because I became very focused on the environment of our planet after being slapped in the face on the Arctic by the impact of climate warming up there. Then discovered this new desert, which had been much hushed up about in Western Kazakhstan, called the Aral, the world's newest desert, the Aral Sea, man-made. This is now recognized as possibly the world's worst man-made environmental disaster. And on your left, the slide on your left demonstrates what this desert once was, which was a bountiful sea. If you look to your right, you have a desert with a measly couple of puddles left of the sea. On the left, the Aral Sea existed as a sea right up until 1960, whereupon the Russians started draining the water to nourish the cotton crops in Uzbekistan. And by the 80s, I think they just thought no one's watching. It was a very remote part of the world. It'd been closed off when it was all under the Soviet Union, and they just pulled the plug. And between 1960 and 1990, there was then 10% left of the water. So I was curious to cross this new desert to find out exactly what happened, exactly what the impact was, and what was being done about it, and whether the measures being undertaken were effective. And it was an expedition of curiosity and learning, because I was determined that my teammate, another woman called Pom Oliver, and myself were not there to be judgmental. It was not a finger-wagging expedition. It was genuinely to find out what was going on and whether the expedition and its legacy could help by making people learn from this awful mistake.
And do you think it has? I mean, have you had interest? Have you talked to people who are starting to understand more about what the fast fashion industry is doing?
Yes, because when we came back, we literally walked out of the desert and straight into COP26 and found that there was a very keen appetite for us to talk there and share our findings, including and backed up by Kazakhstan itself as a country and its government and ambassador, etc., because they want the world to see what had happened. And they're also proud of the measures they've taken to remedy the situation, because a result of this training meant that not just that the fishing industry, which had been their main source of living, and they'd even supplied Russia with a sixth of their fish, but also so livelihoods, so it became, there wasn't anything to do there, so it depopulated, then it obviously developed a desert climate, which was highly toxic because you've got all these desert dust storms now which pick up all the concentrated pesticides and herbicides and sweep them for thousands of miles. In fact, traces of this dust have been found in the Arctic.
Wow. And what is the kind of mileage of this desert? I mean, how big was, when you were walking, how many miles did you have to cover?
We did about 600 click and we had specially designed expedition carts, which were polar sledges I mounted onto wide axles. We pulled with our sledging harnesses. And when those actually got beaten to bits and had to go back to be repaired, we used rucksacks, which was very difficult because, of course, water is the issue, because we were walking through temperatures of 50 degrees plus. And if we go to Ben, if we can fish out slide 11, it's a...
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
That's the sort of devastation we came across. All the animals. We trudged past so many carcasses. It was heartbreaking. The horses, camels, cattle, and they were all on their water tracks, but following them and finding that there was no water at the other end.
Wow. That's really just so shocking, isn't it? And I hope that people are listening to this. Has there been any response from Russia to your exhibition, do you know? Expedition, I meant.
No, we haven't. We know that when it was under Soviet rule, the Soviets knew what they were doing. It was part of a 5-year plan. However, what they didn't know or hadn't been aware of was what the long-term results were going to be, just how widespread and impactful it was going to be. And the problem is now that the sea has been partially restored, particularly in the northern Kazakhstan side. But half of the desert falls into Uzbekistan, and Uzbeks are reluctant to lose their income from the cotton industry. So it's getting other people to help support Uzbekistan in terms of funding, alternatives, in the same way that they have Kazakhstan, where the World Bank, for instance, funded the building of a big dam, which has helped restore some of the water, and with it fish, and with the fish, the population.
Yeah. Now, I've got a couple of questions before we finish. Iris wants to know, could you have been an astronaut? Is that another challenge you could consider yourself taking on?
Maybe for the next generation. Do you know, there's so much to do here by way of exploration still, but I think it's important to share what you do discover on this planet with other people, because by them being educated about our planet, they will be respectful and reverent towards it, because we've also got a lot of repairing and healing to do. So I am anchored on this planet. Thank you very much.
Great. And Geeta really wants to know, did you, in all your explorations, and it doesn't matter whether you were in the middle of the desert or the middle of the ice, did you have any apparitions or strange encounters?
Lots. I love that question. Certainly on Antarctica, when I was sleep deprived in the last 2 weeks of my expedition, I think it was, I was marching these very long hours and getting 1.5, 2 hours sleep every 24 hours. So I started hallucinating.
And what were you hallucinating apart from mashed potato?
Huge fun. Well, there is a grand piano somewhere on Antarctica. I know, I saw it. And I know.
Did you play it, though? I mean, that really would have been the proof of the pudding.
Every time I got close to it.
How fantastic, the Mirage piano. I love that idea.
When people think of mirages as well, definitely on the Arctic, I think because of the hunger that I was going through, because one is the equivalent of malnourished. I could smell toast and honey.
Wow.
So one does get olfactory mirages as well. And music, I heard the most ethereal, what I called fairy music one evening, and I couldn't explain it. It wasn't the wind in the guy ropes, it wasn't the ice. It was very special.
That's extraordinary.
Yes.
How amazing. Gosh, I hope you've written all of these down.
I have.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming along today. I know some of you from book club and some of you are new, and it's great. And do remember that we have book club events as well on Thursdays and Fridays. But the very exciting thing is that PPG is not just this one-off. And Rosie, we are hoping that you are going to stay on and be one of our presenters on PPG. You're happy to do that, aren't you? Please.
Hey, yes, I am delighted. I can't wait.
So just look out for in the new year. We are going to, if there's any questions you didn't manage to ask Rosie today, you will be able to ask her when she is interviewing people. And also we have another PPG coming up. Humphrey is doing on the 27th of December. So please put this in your diary for when you're recovering from all your Christmas food. He is going to be talking to the Nigerian artist Lanre Alagoke, and I hope that I've said his name correctly, who has just turned his life around, picked himself up from being a drug addict, and now runs a really important art charity and helps other people. Phenomenal man. And you may have seen some of the Goldster publicity about this. That is the 27th of December, also at midday. And Rosie will be back in the new year with us. We will have some other guests whose names will be revealed soon. Rosie, you have been an absolute joy to interview. Thank you so much. Got messages flooding in. I'm afraid don't get the chance to read them all out, but what I will do is I will make sure that Rosie is sent the chat so that she can see all of your lovely comments. So thank you. For those of you who are new to Goldster, please do sign up for others of our events. The PPG and book club events are all free, at least until the end of February. So we have a lot of exciting things coming along. And on Thursday, I am talking to Martin Edwards, who is a crime writer, a fascinating man. He's also the consultant for the British Library Crime Classics. That's quite hard to say. And then on Friday, Humphrey is interviewing Michael Ridpath. So that's two events for you next week. The 23rd of December, I'm going to be interviewing Richard Mills about the Beatles and fandom. And then on Christmas Eve, the 24th, join us again for a very special Christmas book club when Humphrey will actually be interviewing me about my book, Dickens and Christmas. Rosie, thank you. You have been an absolute joy. I'm in awe of everything you have done. I cannot believe that we're just sitting here chatting on Zoom when you have been to the ends of the earth. And I don't know anybody else who's done the incredible things you have. So thank you so much for joining our Goldster team. We can't wait to see you on more PPGs, and I'm definitely going to be tuning in for everyone you're interviewing. Thank you so much. And everybody, take care. Have a great week, and I hope to see as many of you as possible on Thursday. Rosie, thank you.
Thank you, Lucinda. Goodbye, everyone.
Everybody. Bye.